let's do a recording. Hi guys, how you doing? Okay, well I'm got a problem tonight. It looks like we're having problems with the recording system. Streamlabs, I'm live here and I'm actually recording, so hopefully I can use that later. And we'll go from that, I think, because I'm not able to get live, I'm not able to monitor myself, which is confusing. I don't know what's gone wrong. When you can't monitor yourself on the phone, you know you're not working and it's not going live. So the only other option you can do is you have the option of a recording system within Streamlabs. And I think what I'll do is just do a little bit of a session, and then I'll send that one out later. So it'll be the live stream, but it's recorded on Streamlabs because it didn't go out live. Does that make any sense? But I can't record it. Oh dear. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll tell everybody that I'm going to do a live stream. And that's the only thing we can do, really. Right. We'll do it this way. Hey guys, how you doing? Bit of an update. We can't seem to get going to live tonight for some reason. It's not going out on the live broadcast, but I can monitor myself and I can also record myself. So what I'll do is I'll record the session tonight and then put it on later tomorrow. So I'll see you soon. Oh, well, okay, fine. Right, so that's the only way we can do it. The only way it can be done. Okay, well, we're recording. I've just said that I'll do a recording tonight and put it out later. So, okay, well, what I was going to do, I can't obviously interact with anyone because it's not live. It's a recording, but we've still got the tricks. We've still got the camera tricks. We can do food tricks here. I can change my cameras around. There you go. So I thought, well, I was hoping I'll do a bit of quo. Let's do a bit of quo. For my friends. There you go. Okay, well, that's a bit of a combination of the old quo together. I thought I would just put them together because I haven't done them for a little while. So I thought we'd put them together. And it is bloody hot out there, isn't it? Eh? It is lovely and warm though, but it's hot. It's odd. Okay, let's do something different. Let's do a rumba, something a little bit different. Always good to experiment. Experiment on a rumba. You gotta find a rumba to experiment on a rumba. In fact, I can't find a freaking rumba. I thought it was a rumba, but it doesn't look like a rumba. It's a jazz thing, I think, if I remember right. Is it a jazz thing? I don't know. Let's just see what these do. Well, it's one of them weird things. Sounds like a Glastonbury press your button job. Yeah, it is. I do a Glastonbury, one of them pressing buttons ones. Yeah, a bit of a 90s dancey thingy. Whoa. Okay, let's do an 80s dancey thingy, sort of. If I can find an 80s dancey thingy. electronic 80s dances thingy would be quite cool. 80s dances thingy. And we do a classic from one of the old synthesizer ones. Might have to just do it on an 8-beat. I don't really think I've got that beat for it. Not done it on this one anyway, so it should be interesting. Especially with one of those, and one of them, and one of them. I don't really want it with one of those, and one of them, and one of them. Let's try to the 8-beat. Saxophone, probably. A nice breather to it. Don't really want to dance. Electronic pop. Let's try electronic pop. Oh God, probably not. See what the beat's like. That's not electronic pop. It might work. We'll have a new version of the model. model. Kraftwerk, yeah. One of the classics, eh? Where all the synthesizer stuff started. Whoa, we're really going back to the 80s there. Back to the 80s. There you go. Well, we had a job earlier on. We've not been on air. We're not on air now, really. I'm recording live, but I'm actually recording live, but not live stream, because the stream wouldn't go stream. So this live stream, but it's not live stream on Facebook, that's being recorded on Streamlines, we'll be on that tomorrow. If you get what I mean. If you don't, that makes two of us. Okay. It's been a warm one. I got my van going. I haven't got my camera on though at the moment. I'm still playing with that one at the moment. That's this camera up here. It turns round, whirls round, and does all sorts. I'm hoping it'll take photos of this bit when I'm playing this bit. I'm knackered. Disco. Let's do a disco, shall we? Disco. Although it's that hot, we could be in Spain. Off to sunny Spain. Well, we might as well be, because we're actually in them heat waves. If it's that hot here, what is it over in Spain? That's what we've got to think about. I mean, normally when it's 30 here, it's 40 there. Now that's hot. Because it's hot when here, when it's 30. Although we do have some weird air, don't we? It's stuffy air in it over here, but over there it's clear, and warmer air, and even the sea is warmer and lighter and clearer. Oh dear. Yeah, never mind. And here's another one on a nice warm evening. This is another Spanish one, but this one's called Spanish Eyes. And it's a nice gentle one. And funny, it's a rumba. There you go, another Spanish one. Since we got Spanish weather, I thought it was appropriate to do that one. And it's funny enough, if you're chilling out in a tent in Glastonbury, here's something to chill you out a little bit. This is a rumba. This is called When They Begin. Okay, do one more then, and then we'll call that a night. And it's too quick to do that one, so. Let's do a rumba, but this is a more. And there you go. Thank you very much. Well, it's been a bit of a different one today. I've had to record my live session because the computer went off when I started. I booted everything up. It was on standby, and I booted it up, and all of a sudden it just went straight to a blank screen. I thought, whoa, that's not good. So I thought, okay, quick reboot, and it'll be fine. But the quick reboot turned out to be a lot longer reboot than it was supposed to be. And then it lost its this and it lost that, so I had to put this, that, and other in, and then I had to put this one back in and put one of them in. So basically reset everything up again, put 2 more cameras on, put my normal camera on for that one, my normal camera on for that one. I still ain't got around to this one. Got a nice cool fan going on at the moment, so that's not too bad. But went live like I normally do, thinking it would be fine. But normally I can monitor it from my phone, so I know when it's gone live. The light was on, saying live, yeah, okay, fine, interesting. No way of monitoring it, couldn't even monitor. It didn't go through live on Facebook. So I thought, okay, I'll have a bit of a fumble about here, so I had a fumble about, sort through things out. Couldn't get it live, gave up in the end, it's getting hot in here. I thought, oh, no, put the fan on, call down Steve, just do a recording. So with the Streamlabs, there is a facility where I can actually use a record button on it. So I'm recording this session of my Saturday night live, and then I'll pop it down live on the Facebook later on, once I've grabbed it off this one. So you'll have to grab it off this one, and then do it live the other one. So although you will still have the live that was on Facebook on Saturday night, when I normally do, luckily there's a record session button on there, so if it don't go live, you usually record it. But this went live, didn't monitor anything, didn't even go out to live stream, so I thought I'd record it. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much. Check out all my links. All my links are basically there for albums, CDs. There's loads of different things. I just hum the tune in my head. I never had a listen in my life. I can't read music. I play in a 432 frequency, which basically a lot easier for me, and it's a lot better for the ears. And it's the secret. You've heard of the secret chord from Quo. Well, this is the secret frequency. Okay, right, well, take care, guys. We will have this up and running a bit better for next week. For some reason, I don't know what caused it. Probably it got too hot. It probably just decided to shut down. It says I'm not working in this heat. So that was it. So it shut down, went blank screen. So I thought, I'm not going to get a headache over it, I'm just going to carry on as normal. I've got a recording facility there, so I'll record it. Simple. If it doesn't want to play a game, I would do it that way. Anyway, guys, thank you very much for joining us. Hope you enjoyed the music. I'll see you soon.